Up to 20 minutes away from 10 here on the Radio Wammo Breakfast.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Kiwi.
Talking sex, bombs and burgers, how war, porn and fast food created technology as we know it. It's a new book by Peter Nowak, and he's a Canadian-based technology journalist. He's also, a number of years ago, worked at the New Zealand Herald in Auckland as well. He joins me now in the Kiwi studio on a bit of a tour at the moment. Hello to you, Peter.
How are you doing?
Yeah, very, very good. Now, the premise behind this book started when somehow you found yourself in front of Paris Hilton's wee sex video. What is it, One Night in Paris or something like that?
Yeah. It was, I think I was here in New Zealand when I first saw it, because it was 2004 is when it started making the rounds. And the thing I noticed about the video, which is, probably, I watched it for different reasons than the average person did, I think, which is I was kind of amazed that a lot of it was green. So it was, filmed in night vision. Yeah. And I thought, where have I seen this before? And, I started thinking about it, and eventually it came to me that it was, it was during the first Iraq War way back in 1991, the liberation of Kuwait. And so I remember all the news footage of that was also green. So here it was this, military technology that years later has morphed into not just consumer technology, but also essentially pornographic technology.
Yeah, likewise. And I shouldn't have a knowing nod at the moment, but yes, so that's interesting. That and I also remember that war footage as well, with the lights in the sky, but it was all kind of green, and that was night vision, wasn't it? So it was. Yeah, it was the way that we could see stuff happening at night.
Yeah, and but that actually got me down the road of looking into, where all these technologies around us. Started looking into where they come from, and eventually you trace them all back to the military. And they're always, just about everything around us has in some way, shape, or form been tied to military research. So
well, another example you use in the book is the microwave oven.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a great example. It was back in the Second World War is when radar was developed. It was jointly developed by the British and the Americans, and basically manufactured by this company called Raytheon, which is the big American military contractor. And so the war was winding down, and this company said, well, what are we going to do after the war? We're going to go broke. The demand for radar is going to dry up. But one of their scientists was in a lab, and he had a chocolate bar in his his pocket, and a chocolate bar melted. So he fooled around with some other foods, and he found that basically the tube inside the radar, it's called the magnetron. Yeah. It exerts heat whenever it's in use. So he patented it as a cooking device, and they worked on it for a few years and came up with a microwave oven, which the first one was called the radar range.
And they were huge, weren't they?
Yeah, they were like the size of a refrigerator. Yeah. And weighed like a ton.
Yeah, much like computers at the time as well.
Yeah, pretty much.
I suppose. When I read that bit in the book, I was actually more worried about something else when he said that his the chocolate bar melted in his pocket, and I was thinking, well, that's in his pocket, so there's something else in that region as well. I wonder what the microwaves were doing.
Yeah, well, they didn't sell well for a while because that's exactly what people were worried about, right? Yeah. They thought, well, hey, we're thinking about nuclear power here, or microwave energy. Not nuclear power, microwave energy. And do we really want to have this device in our house that emits microwave energy? So yeah, it didn't take off immediately. It took a couple of decades before there was safety precautions put in and regulations and all that stuff.
I mean, some of this technology still does scare me in some ways, and especially when it comes to health. And there's a lot of sort of trial and error, it seems, over the decades with some of this technology and some of its ill effects on people as well.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's kind of funny because to bookend the book, towards the end, I talk about this new cancer therapy. It's called proton therapy, and this is basically using proton beams to treat and eradicate cancer cells rather than X-ray beams. And it's being developed in a lab that's their sole purpose is to make sure that the U.S. nuclear weapons are still working without actually exploding these missiles.
Wow.
So I visited the lab, and they were telling me all about these proton beams. So it's kind of neat where that's essentially what the book is all about, right? Here's this most destructive weapon that humanity has ever developed, the nuclear bomb, yet the side effects of it are, one of the side effects of it is better cancer therapy, which I think is really amazing.
Or even World War II itself, right? A terrible event, millions of people dead all around the world, but it was a time of massive innovation going on.
The effects of it, we see the effects of it every day, all around us. We don't even notice it. So whether it's things like the microwave oven, so many plastics were invented during the Second World War. So many food processing techniques, freezing, dehydration, all these things were perfected and developed during the war so that they could, bring food over to the troops in Europe and feed them there.
Tell us about the chip that we have these days at the local chippy.
Oh, the French fries.
Yeah.
Well, that was the whole process of freezing and dehydrating potatoes was perfected during the war by several suppliers because they once again they had to feed the troops when they came over to Europe. So after the war, companies like McDonald's converted to this frozen these freezing techniques. And that's where the frozen food market really took off. Orange juice was the first frozen food, and that was specifically developed for the military. It's kind of funny, the company that perfected the technique, they were building a huge plant for war purposes. Yeah. And then the war ended, and they were like, oh, crap, what are we going to do now?
Yeah.
They had to basically convert and scramble. But they didn't have a problem because orange juice was a huge hit after the war. Yeah.
It was even fascinating for me to find out that that McDonald's, the greatest exponent of weird Frankenstein food, at one point in the early history were actually dominated by food cycles, like the fact that the potatoes they were using could only be grown at a certain time of the year and stored for a certain length of time, but the frozen chip changed all that.
Yeah. They spent. It was estimated that they spent about $10 million in their, and this is in 1960s dollars. They spent about $10 million in that first decade trying to perfect the chip, and trying to figure out a way to get it to taste the same and be the same consistency year round. Because, like you said, the weather differences throughout the year just resulted in strange tasting fries.
The other day, I had a wee scratchy ticket, those instant Kiwi scratchy tickets, and at the top of it had a little spot that said, "Scratch here, it smells like watermelon." So I did that, and I thought, oh. And then I was thinking after reading the book, does that kind of technology have its roots back in wartime?
Yep. Yeah, if you really want to get technical, it goes back to this one instrument called the mass spectrometer, which nobody outside a lab has ever heard of. It's basically this device that allows scientists to really get down into look at matter, look at things on a really molecular level, and that was it was used during the war to produce the atomic bomb, actually. And after the war, food producers really started getting into using this device, and they were able to drill down into what exactly was in the food. So, for example, Coca-Cola has always had this closely guarded formula, but once the mass spectrometer came along, you could use it to kind of really figure out what went into Coke. So, of course, they had to trademark it, but nevertheless, all the secrets of food were laid bare.
Yeah.
And that's where it was kind of the beginnings of the flavor industry, the artificial flavor industry. Which I find it kind of strange that the artificial flavor industry is the same companies that make things like perfumes. It's kind of disturbing.
So, but pre World War II, if you were to look at a food label, it would be pretty standard. You'd be able to see exactly what was in it. But it was after the war that you started seeing numbers starting to creep into it, and emulsifiers and all kinds of weird additives.
Well, yes and no, because before the war they didn't actually have any regulations that required labeling of food. So it's kind of it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You didn't have to label the food, but then there wasn't that much in it, right?
Yeah.
So it's only once all these chemicals started to be added into food that people put pressure on governments to require labeling.
Peter, finally, porn. How has porn shaped the technology that we use today?
Well, porn is really, the porn industry is a little bit different than the military industry. The military really creates a lot of technologies. Porn industry doesn't actually create too much, but what they do is they jump onto technologies first. That's important because when, if you or I invented something, we would need money to keep working on it, right? To get it to a mainstream audience. So of course that's where porn comes in, is they're quick to try out new technologies and provide those dollars.
For an example, right now, we're going out live via Ustream, and then this will be recorded, put up on YouTube. Have we got the porn industry to thank for this?
Yeah, in some ways, they were one of the first industries to really get into online video. I'm sure you remember back in early 2000s.
No, I don't remember anything. Not at all.
Or late 90s or early 2000s. The only way you could get online videos, you go to a porn site and you get these sort of postage stamp size videos that moved at something like one frame every 30 seconds. But that was the originator of YouTube and that sort of stuff that we have today.
Yeah.
And so they didn't just show the way, as some of the people I talked to in the book said, they didn't just show the way in technology, they also showed the way in economics. And you're looking at a lot of websites today starting to talk about charging for access. Porn companies...
They've been doing that for years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They figured out a way of doing it.
And I'm sure everyone's heard about the VHS beta war as well that happened, back in the 70s as well. Yeah.
That's a perfect example, too, of what I was talking about, where the pornography industry provides those early dollars to continue developing a technology. Because when VCRs first came along, you have to remember, Hollywood didn't like them. They sued Sony, and that case went on for years. And so who stepped in to say, hey, we'll try out your product, we'll develop it, we'll give you some money for you to bring it along, of course, was the porn companies. So in the early 80s, if you looked at, top rental lists, 4 of the top 10 movies were pornography movies.
Peter Nowak, author of Sex, Bombs and Burgers, it's out right now, How War, Porn and Fast Food Created Technology as We Know It. Peter, thanks so much for coming on in and telling us all about it in the Kiwi studio.
All right, thank you.